Singer Whitney Houston, one of the greatest voices of our generation, CNN has gotten confirmation from her representative, has died.
Whitney Houston's cause of death was never the full story. On February 11, 2012, she was found face down in a bathtub at the Beverly Hilton Hotel. The water was still running. It was scalding hot. She had been dead for at least an hour before anyone found her. Her team had told the world she was clean, that she had turned a corner, that the woman who had checked in and out of rehab for a decade had finally found her way back. The autopsy said otherwise. What the toxicology report revealed and what the people closest to her knew and said nothing about took years to fully surface. And when it did, it changed everything about the story the world had been told. Whitney Houston was not just a singer. She was the standard against which every other singer was measured. Born in Newark, New Jersey in 1963 to a gospel singer mother and entertainment executive father, she grew up in a church where music was not a hobby, but a calling. Her mother, Sissy, was a backup vocalist who had sung behind Aretha Franklin and Elvis Presley. Her cousin was Dionne Warwick. Her godmother was Aretha Franklin herself. She had no choice but to be extraordinary, and she was. By the time she was 19 years old, Clive Davis, the most powerful man in the music industry, had signed her to Arista Records after watching her perform at a small showcase in New York. He later said it was the easiest decision he ever made. Her debut album came out in 1985 and sold over 20 million copies. The follow-up sold more. By the late 1980s, Whitney Houston had become something that happens maybe once in a generation. A voice so technically perfect and emotionally devastating that it stopped people mid-conversation when it came out of a speaker. I will always love you. I have nothing. Greatest love of all. If you are old enough to remember hearing those songs for the first time, you remember exactly where you were. In 1992, Whitney Houston married Bobby Brown. The industry is baffled. Her handlers were horrified. The public was confused. Bobby Brown was a troubled R&B artist with a growing reputation for erratic behavior, arrests, and substance abuse. Whitney was the most celebrated female vocalist on the planet. What nobody understood at that time, and what Whitney herself admitted years later, was that she had been using drugs long before she met Bobby Brown. She told Oprah Winfrey in 2009 that marijuana had been part of her life since her early career, that cocaine had followed, that the image of the clean, church-going good girl that Clive Davis and Arista Records had spent years building was exactly that, an image. Bobby Brown did not introduce Whitney Houston to drugs, but the marriage took whatever was already there and accelerated it past any point of easy return. Their daughter, Bobby Christina, was born in 1993 and grew up in a household that lurched between chaos and performance, between genuine love and genuine destruction. By the early 2000s, the deterioration was visible. Interviews where she appeared confused or slurred, a concert tour where she walked off stage mid-performance, a jaw-dropping television interview with Diane Sawyer in 2002 where she said, live, on camera, that she did not do crack cocaine because crack is cheap. The marriage ended in 2007 after 14 years. Whitney checked into rehab, came back out, checked in again. The people around her said she was getting better. In February 2012, Whitney Houston was in Los Angeles for Grammy weekend. She was 48 years old, and by accounts from people who saw her that week, she was in good spirits. She performed at a pre-Grammy party on the Thursday night, sang for 20 minutes, and people who were there said her voice still had something in it. Not what it had been, but something. She was staying at the Beverly Hilton. On the afternoon of February 11th, her personal assistant went to check on her and found her face down in the bathtub. The water was still running. By the time paramedics arrived, there was nothing to be done. She was pronounced dead at 3:55 in the afternoon. The world found out within hours, and the tributes poured in the way they always do, disbelieving, enormous, grief that felt both genuine and somehow insufficient for what had been lost. And then the toxicology report came back. The official cause of death was accidental drowning. That is what the coroner's report said, and it is technically accurate. But the toxicology report that accompanied it told the rest of the story. Cocaine was present in Whitney Houston's system at the time of her death. So were prescription sedatives, Xanax, Flexeril, Benadryl, multiple medications that should have never been combined with each other, let alone with cocaine, let alone in a bathtub. The coroner listed heart disease and cocaine use as contributing factors in drowning. Her team had told the world she was clean. People who had been around her in days before her death later said they had seen signs that she was not, that there had been erratic behavior, that there had been conversations that didn't quite make sense, that the woman checking into the Beverly Hilton on that Tuesday was not a woman who was in recovery. Nobody intervened. Nobody made a call. Nobody said to anyone with the authority to act, "Something is wrong. She needs help right now." And the question of why, of who knew what and when and what they chose to do with that knowledge, is the part of Whitney Houston's story that has never been satisfactorily answered. Her mentor Clive Davis held his annual pre-Grammy party in the same hotel the night she died, 4 floors below where her body was still being examined. He did not cancel it. That decision was criticized at the time and has been criticized every year since. Davis said he believed Whitney would have wanted the party to go on. The people who loved her said they were not sure he was right. Here is what I want you to understand about Whitney Houston. The voice was real. The talent was real. The joy she brought to hundreds of millions of people across 40 years was completely, undeniably real. But the system that built her also failed her. The people who profited from her talent, who turned her voice into one of the most commercially successful careers in the history of recorded music, were the same people who looked away when she needed someone to look directly at her and say enough. The official story was accidental drowning, and technically that is true. But Whitney Houston drowned because of what was in her body. And what was in her body had been there in varying quantities for decades. And the people who knew, who saw the signs, who heard the stories, who were in that hotel that week, made choices about what to do with what they knew. She was 48 years old. 3 years after her death, her daughter, Bobby Christina, was found face down in a bathtub in almost identical circumstances. She was 22 years old. She died 6 months later. The real reason Whitney Houston died is not a mystery. It is a series of decisions made by people who had the power to intervene and chose not to. That is the part of the story that does not fit neatly into a toxicology report. If this changed how you see her, subscribe. Because every week we tell you the real story behind the people you thought you already knew.